Introduction to Genesis. Genesis is the first book of the Bible. It is also the first of the 5 books of the law. Genesis actually means beginning, and it is filled with beginnings. The beginning of the universe, the earth, plant and animal life, and people, families and nations. Sadly, it is also the beginning of sin. The first 11 chapters tell the story of creation and how sin came into the world. Adam and Eve were created by God in His own image, but they chose to disobey God, bringing sin, suffering, and even death into the world. The rest of Genesis is often called the patriarchal history. It tells of how God chose Abraham and his descendants to be His people. Genesis also contains all the exciting stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. The book ends as the Israelites come to live in Egypt. Genesis was written by Moses. Of course, Moses was not alive when the earth was created. His writing was inspired by God. That means God told Moses what to write. When Moses, the writer of Genesis, lived during the 1400s BC. The events of Genesis begin with creation, the beginning of time itself, and end with the death of Joseph in 1805 BC. Why? Genesis shows that God is the Lord and creator of all things. He has perfect control over all of His creation. God can use even terrible things to bring about great good, just as He did when Joseph was sold into slavery. Redemption thread. Genesis tells us where we came from, God, and how sin came into the world, disobeying God. It also shows us the beginnings of God's grace. From creation, God had a plan to save His people, first through His promise to Abraham, and finally through Jesus, His Son. Stories from Genesis. The creation, Genesis 1 through 2, 3. The temptation and the fall, Genesis 3, 1 through 7. God warns Noah, Genesis 6, 9 through 22. The Tower of Babylon, Genesis 11, 1 through 9, and Joseph's dreams, Genesis 37, 1 through 11.